Well, good evening and welcome, everyone. What a great crowd we have here tonight. It's very good to have you with us for our 12th annual Anderson Lecture in Science and Religion. My name is Casey Shalopsky, and I'm the Associate Director of our Center for Faith and Learning at Ansem House. Ansem House has been present on the U of M campus since 1982. Our mission is to connect the Christian faith with all areas of learning at the university because we believe that the Christian tradition has resources to help us properly align our faith and academic pursuits, resulting in an approach to God, to our neighbors, and to ourselves that will lead to a flourishing life. We sponsor many events on campus that we hope will nurture a community conducive to this end. This evening, we continue a series of annual lectures focused on the relationship of Christian faith to the sciences. Our Anderson lectures are named in honor of V. Elving Anderson, who is a distinguished geneticist here at the University of Minnesota, who is a committed Christian and a national leader in faith and science conversations. And very early on, he was a key faculty leader in the McLaurin Institute, which later became Ansem House. We have the privilege of having Elving's son, Carl Anderson, here tonight with us. And so I just want to say thank you, Carl, for being here and for your continued support for these lectures throughout the years. Each year, we are privileged to feature some of the most distinguished Christians in the sciences, speaking to the intersection of their faith with their academic work. Our past Anderson lecturers have included climate scientist Katherine Hayhoe, physicist Stephen Barr, neuroscientist Bill Newsom, and even the Pope's astronomer, Brother Guy Consolmagno. So maybe you're here joining us for the first time. Maybe you're a regular. You come every year, and you have for years. We're very glad that you're here, and we want to give a warm welcome. And we are delighted to invite you into this conversation, regardless of the perspective or background you bring to tonight's topic. So, for tonight, we are asking the question, are we merely machines? And to help us answer this question, we've invited Dr. Rosalind Picard, professor at MIT's Media Lab, to deliver this evening's lecture. I'd now like to welcome to the podium Dr. Bob Tranquillo. He's a distinguished McKnight University professor in both the biomedical engineering department and the chemical engineering and material sciences department, and he will give an introduction to Dr. Picard. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, welcome, glad you could come. So I feel like before I introduce our very distinguished speaker, which I'm privileged to do, I need to give a disclaimer that this introduction was generated with HI, human intelligence, if that's what you call trying to edit a very impressive bio into 2 minutes or less. So let me get with it. So Dr. Rosalind Picard is a scientist, inventor, and engineer, the Grove Herman Professor in Health Sciences and Technology at MIT's Media Lab, founder and director of the affective, that's with an A, affective computing research group at the MIT Media Lab, founding faculty chair of MIT's Mind, Hand, Heart Initiative, and a faculty member of the MIT Center for Neurobiological Engineering. She's co-founded 2 companies, Affectiva, which is now part of Smart Eye, providing emotion AI technologies now used by more than 25% of the global Fortune 500s, and Empatica, providing wearable sensors and analytics to improve health. Starting from inventions by Dr. Picard and her team, Empatica created the first AI-based smartwatch cleared by the FDA for monitoring epileptic seizures and alerting for potentially life-saving health. She has been named to the Academy of Inventors for these and other impactful innovations. As Dr. Picard studied human mechanisms of perception in her early research, she became convinced of the importance of emotion for making AI that would be smarter and better at interacting with people. She subsequently wrote the book, Affective Computing, which became instrumental in starting a new field by that name. Today, that field has its own journal, international conference, and professional society. So if you're like me, I was a couple days ago, what is affective computing? I mean, I try to do effective computing in my research. not always successfully, but here's a working definition, and she will, I'm sure, elaborate on it. It's the study and development of systems and devices that can recognize, interpret, process, and simulate human emotions. All right, so you couldn't ask for a hotter topic than what you're going to hear tonight. Dr. Picard has authored or co-authored more than 400 peer-reviewed scientific articles spanning affective computing, AI, digital health, including several Best Paper Awards. Already in 2005, she was named as a fellow of the IEEE, and now also the Association for the Advancement of Affective Computing and Association for Computing Machinery. In addition to her extensive professional service with journals, universities, and federal agencies, Dr. Picard interacts regularly with industry and has consulted for companies such as Apple, AT&T, iRobot, and Samsung, among others. She and her MIT Media Lab group's achievements have been featured in media outlets such as the New York Times, The Independent, National Public Radio, Scientific America Frontiers, ABC's Nightline, and World News Tonight, Time, Vogue, Wired, okay, you get the idea. Beyond all that, Dr. Picard also shares her expertise and insight regarding the intersection of affective computing and faith in various venues, and we are incredibly fortunate to have her visit you and give the Anderson Lecture tonight. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Picard.
Thanks so much, Bob. Oops. We're not on the first slide. Okay, now we're on the first slide. Thank you so much. That felt like longer than 2 minutes, maybe. It's because people have feelings and they change time. Machines don't have feelings. But let me ask you, are we merely machines? Because many of my colleagues say we are, or they say maybe strike the word merely, and we are machines. Let's start with what is a machine. And when we think about it at its core, and I used to design the hardware quite literally, in the middle here there's like some kind of inputs that are transformed to some kind of outputs. Maybe it's what we type to it and what it gives us back in text, or it could be that it's transforming something that we're not really that aware of what it's transforming, but we're aware maybe of what it's sensing, or what it's actually filtering through, or maybe we're interested in its electronic self-cooling functions, or some other processes that it's doing with energy or the environment. In the case here, all the words that are described here on top of a picture of electronics also apply to another picture. These same words apply to a tree. A tree can be seen as taking the carbon dioxide in, transforming it to oxygen out, taking water in with the carbon dioxide, oxygen and glucose out, photosynthesis. It can be seen as filtering things it's drawing up from the soil. It can be seen as transforming the sunlight, the wind, sensing the temperature, the ambient sensing, and changing a lot of its functions, also recycling its leaves. So a tree also, by the descriptions I gave before, could be seen as a machine. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't usually think of trees as machines. I love sitting under a beautiful tree. And when we experience a tree, I'm curious if you think of experiencing it as a machine. Is the person sitting under this tree sitting under a machine? So in this talk, I'm going to argue I don't think a tree or a person is merely a machine. I'm going to go further and say I don't think it's wise to even describe people as machines. Now, I'll acknowledge that not only can we describe living things as machines. One colleague of mine is like, yeah, we're just biological machines. Another's like, oh, we're just gene survival machines. We can describe living things and people as machines. You can also describe non-living things as machines. Even rocks can be seen as filtering, transforming inputs to outputs, applying hydraulic forces. Non-living rocks in certain formations could function like a machine. I build non-physical machines through mathematical algorithms. I promise you no equations in this talk tonight, but I will give a use for this particular thing called a support vector machine, which is used in a lot of AI. And your favorite sports team, when they're functioning well, sometimes they're called a well-oiled machine, right? Or a team, great teamwork is called that. So we can use the term machine for living, non-living groups of people, all kinds of things, right? And I'm not objecting to that. There are all kinds of ways we use it. Now, Bob mentioned that I'm working on affective computing, which when I first proposed the term to the director of the Media Lab, he said, affective computing, I think that's nicely confused with effective computing. So Bob, you're right on. I hope it is. Now, this was not a topic that I was attracted to originally. I was attracted to the human brain, and I still am. The human brain is so amazing. I even had a surgeon come to me the other day and said he's been looking inside so many brains, and he's starting to believe in God just looking at the human brain. As I started to learn about the human brain, I was interested in how to figure out what it was doing so that I could help computers perceive information better. You're going to hear more about this as computers move into bodies, into robots, and become perceptual agents in our environment, having to sense, is there a person in front of me, is there a chair, what's going on in the world, computer vision. And to do better computer vision, I was studying human vision. And human vision has all these interesting layers, but all of the human vision experts I talked to were only focused on the cortex. And then I read a book on synesthesia, where a man was talking, Richard Saitoic, the author, was talking about people who had a union of the senses, a crossing of the senses. He heard a man in the kitchen tasting soup and saying, there aren't enough points on the chicken. And he was a neurologist, and he said, what do you mean there aren't enough points on the chicken? The guy looked a little embarrassed. He explained that when he had taste, he felt shapes in his hand. And Richard, the neurologist, got interested in, tell me about these crossing of these senses, and started to learn that some people, the visual system is crossed with taste. Some people audition music with things they see, and so forth. So as I pondered how this would work in our tiny little package up here that's so amazing, I learned about these regions of the brain that were deeper, that the human vision scientists were not looking at. And these were regions involved in, non-cortical regions involved in emotion, memory, and attention. And I thought, well, I'm not touching emotion. I was one of the few women in engineering. I thought that will ruin my career for sure. But memory and attention are important. So I started learning more about these regions. Unfortunately, I kept finding how important emotion was. And I tried to get some guys to work on it, and none of them would touch it. And I thought, darn. And I thought, well, maybe I'll find other stuff more important. The more I learned, the more I saw how important it was. I thought, oh, shoot, I got to do something about this. Further, as I looked through all the problems my colleagues in AI were trying to solve, like more rational decision-making, not just perception, better language selection, action selection, and so much more, I learned that emotion was actually playing a pivotal role in just about everything on the list for AI. So if you think, like the Star Trek Spock character, that being unemotional leads to better decisions, well, that's not what the data show. Certainly extreme emotions can lead to bad decisions, but we've got emotion all the time, and usually it's properly regulated, and it's helping us make very intelligent, flexible, adaptive decisions to deal with complex, unpredictable inputs in real time. It's extremely important for healthy, intelligent human functioning. So with that, I thought, oh shoot, now I really do have to talk about emotion to get people in AI to start thinking about what it's actually useful for. And after several unsuccessful attempts to publish things with journals saying things like, emotion doesn't fit here, the head of our school, who wrote a lot of books, was like, books aren't peer-reviewed. So it couldn't be rejected. Actually, a book editor who had previously worked with me doing a chapter on a book called How's Legacy offered to publish it before I even wrote it. And so there I was. I wrote a book called Affective Computing. About the time we were finally able to start getting our work published. That was another story, some tricks you play to get them to see that, to look at the work on its own merits, not just to knee-jerk reject a new area. And this book described the things on this slide here about expressing, recognizing, handling, regulating, and utilizing emotions. Now, I'll be clear today, computers do not have emotions in the sense that we do. We have feelings, they do not. We have experiences, they do not. They can, however, simulate just about anything that we know how to describe carefully like a recipe. So as we can start to describe precise functions of any of these things, computers start to be able to perform some of these. I'm going to show you a clip now of the first time I saw a social emotional robot. It's the first social robot. It was built by Cynthia Brazil in her doctoral thesis work. She's now a tenured professor. And this robot, Kismet, is going to show you the first example of listening for affective changes in a human speaker and responding in an embodied way to some of those changes. And here's a young Cynthia introducing it.
So another important skill for the robot to be able to learn from people is being able to recognize communicative intent.
Very good, Kismet.
And the way we've done that with Kismet right now is to have the robot recognize by tone of voice.
Yes.
Are you praising it? Are you scolding it?
Where'd you put your body? No. No. You're not to do that. No.
So Kismet, hearing not just the no, no, but the emphatic no, no, and responding like it looked sorry, is also showing an example of emotional intelligence, which we did not see in the first software agents. I don't know how many of you remember the Microsoft Office Assistant, the paperclip. And Microsoft said that sometimes people would say they liked the paperclip, but Bill Gates got a standing ovation when it went away. And one of the things people hated about it is it would come out looking really happy when things were not going well for you. So Kismet was much smarter, right? If you're like, no, no, I don't like this, then it should look sorry, like a dog putting its ears back and tail down. And when a software agent does that, it endears itself more to people. Now, that could be great for building a relationship, and we've shown even a bond with it. That can also be dangerous, as we're seeing today, with people over-relying and building unhealthy relationships with agents and not building healthy relationships with people. So we recognize the power of this technology is intense, and there may be very scary and dangerous ways to use it, as well as other ways that might make it easier for people and technology to interact. While trying to figure out how to give a computer the ability to read some changes on people's faces, a young man knocked on my door and said he had come to borrow a map for a bicycle trip we were going on, and he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm trying to figure out how to get this computer to recognize smiling, frowning, brow raises, stuff like that." He said, "Oh, could you help my brother?" And I said, "Tell me about your brother." And he said, "My brother has autism, and he has difficulty reading other people's emotions, in particular facial expressions, vocal changes." This led us to a lot of work where we realized that what we were building for capabilities for machines could actually be better purposed in many ways to help build better capabilities for people. Augmenting human ability, helping give people tools to do things. And this little boy is wearing a baseball cap with a camera built in. He liked that we built the face recognition system that allowed him to get real-time feedback as he looked at people in his family, and it would whisper in his ear things like, they're smiling, they look interested, they're looking less and less interested. We professors were told when we monologue too long, we need these to tell us when to stop. Here is just an example that was done later by Affectiva, our first spin-out company. Our software became the most downloaded software. This was joint work with Rana El-Kalyoubi. I co-founded Affectiva. And here's just an example. It's actually tracking much more than the points that you see there being shown. And you see it can track multiple people. This was over a decade ago. Now, of course, this kind of thing is ubiquitous. It's in robots and all kinds of systems that can not only see that there's a face there, even when I was getting a visa for the UK the other day, it's critiquing my image that I took. I smiled. It pointed out, retake the image without smiling, right? These technologies are being used in lots of systems today. We were able to successfully deploy it not only in one system to help people with autism, but to give out versions of it that lots of people could use to build tools to help people with autism. Glasses, games, lots of other things that have enabled people to build these social emotional skills in real time, whether they want real-time feedback or sort of like a prosthesis. Some said they want like a cognitive affective prosthesis. I think the first one we called was a motion sensing prosthesis, which had the unfortunate acronym of being ESP. And the autism people call it mind reading, which meant that suddenly we started getting letters from all kinds of people around the world who want to know if we were doing weird things, help them interpret signals in their attic. And I'm like, no, this is just about translating computer vision movements to likely possible interpretations, which still don't tell you what the person is feeling, right? Because you can fake a smile, you can fake interest, but people who were on the autism spectrum and people also who were seeing impaired told us that this helped them a lot in conversations. Now, one thing I've learned a lot from working at the MIT Media Lab, I have wonderful colleagues who are constantly emphasizing that we build technology by, with, and for the people that we're serving. And so we hang out with them, we get to know them. And as I was hanging out for many weeks with different people on the autism spectrum and becoming friends, in particular with one who became really my teacher, one day she said to me, "Roz, you have it all wrong." Great, I'm so sorry, what do I have wrong? She said, "My biggest problem is not reading other people's emotions. My biggest problem is you're not reading my emotion." What are we not reading? I'm sorry, what am I not reading? She says, not just you, it's everybody's not reading my emotion. Well, what is it we're not reading? You're not reading my stress. And I realized that while we're all pretty good at hiding stress, and here's a picture of a little boy who I don't think is hiding stress, he looks stressed, we have many different ways of showing it. And some of them may be misunderstood by people. I realized also that we had built technology in the lab that was wired to people's fingers that read skin conductance, sympathetic nervous system response, like when your palms get sweaty when you're stressed. And originally we thought it was just like a sweat response. Now we know it's much more interesting than that. But we had this in the lab, but we knew we had to have a version where the lab could go home with people because the stress they experienced in the lab was very different than in their real life. So we had to make it wireless, we had to make it small, we had to make it portable, and you see this little sweatband here with homebrew electronics in it. Once it was in that form, a lot of people wanted to borrow it. One day, right before winter break, another young student knocks on my door and says, "Professor Picard, could I borrow one of your sensors? My little brother has autism, he can't talk, and I want to take it home over vacation and see what's stressing him out." And I said, "Sure, in fact, don't just take one, take two." They broke all the time back then, and so he takes two. He puts them on his little brother. I'm back in the lab looking at the data, and I notice that the boy's data looked pretty calm most days, but one day had the biggest peak I'd ever seen, and it was on only one side of the body. And I'm scratching my head going like, how on earth could he be stressed on half of his body? And as an electrical engineer, I tried to debug why this could be. Was that sensor broken or the other one broken? Nothing explained it. Finally, I resorted to old-fashioned debugging. I picked up my phone. I called him at home on vacation. "Hi, how's your little brother?" any idea what happened to him, this date and time? And he says, I don't know, but I'll check the diary. I say a prayer like, diary? Like, what's the odds he, I now have I raised 3 teenage boys. What are the odds he would have written this down, right? Very low in my family. And he comes back and he has the exact date and time written down. He says that was right before he had a grand mal seizure. Now, I didn't know anything about seizures. I'm quickly searching, and soon I was paired with the head of epilepsy surgery at Children's Hospital Boston, who was very interested in the fact that this was on just one side, and that, yes, he'd had patients whose hair stands on end on one arm before a seizure. So we started collecting gold standard data 24/7 around the clock after getting ethics board approval. And here's a patient with the gold standard electroencephalogram, EEG on his head, ECG on his chest, and video, and now EDA, electrodermal activity, on his wrists with our sensors. And in this first cohort, we found 100%, just shocking, you never see those kind of numbers, 100% of the patients who had these grand mal seizures had this more than 2 standard deviations signal increase of what we were measuring with the seizure. More than 2 standard deviations increase over the pre-seizure period. So my student Ming Po took machine learning. Actually, in this case, it was a support vector machine, one of those kinds of mathematical machines I showed you earlier, and built an algorithm that could tell the difference between a generalized tonic-clonic seizure or a grand mal seizure and no seizure. And this was part of his thesis. Now, this was not preceding the seizure in forecasting at the time. It was just detection. Today, the Mayo Clinic and others have been using sensors from our lab that are aiding in forecasting research. I also learned that there was a thing called sudden unexpected death in epilepsy, which I'd never heard of before. I'm curious how many of you have heard of this? I know we have a lot of medical people here, but still not many have. Many of you heard of sudden infant death syndrome? Infants, just about everybody. They now think that many of the SIDS cases might actually be SUDEP cases in infants. The brain autopsies are showing possible presence of a seizure. This is something that can happen. Epilepsy seizures can happen to anybody with a brain. When you have the unusual electroactivity spread over the brain or generalize and cause convulsions, usually you'll be fine right afterwards, fortunately. It's very rare that people die. But it is the #2 cause of all years of potential life loss of all neurological disorders. There's a SUDEP every 7 to 9 minutes. And it's 5 times deadlier if you're alone when it happens. And now it's believed that most of the deaths are preventable if somebody is there. And you don't even have to be a doctor. You just have to be somebody who can stimulate the person, turn them on their side. So with learning about this, spun out another company, Empatica, that worked very hard to get the first FDA clearance for this device. It's one of the first FDA cleared devices that's running AI inside it, Empatica Embrace. And then I got an email that made my skin conductance go through the roof one morning. A mom whose daughter was wearing our device. The mom sent this mail. She said she was in the shower. Her phone was on the counter next to her in the shower. I think I can stand over here. So her phone's there. She's in the shower. Her phone goes off and says her daughter might be having a seizure. So she runs out of the shower to her daughter's bedroom, sees her daughter face down in bed, blue and not breathing. She immediately flips her child over, and her child takes a breath and another breath. And she turned pink, she said, and back to her normal color. And she sent me pictures of her later that day on the swing and playing, and it was great. She said, "This device just saved my daughter's life." I said, "This device got you there in time to save your daughter's life. I wish we could build a device that would just snuff it out, but that doesn't exist." Although people, probably some of you here, are working on these implants that can help. So this is an example of AI plus human working together. The family wanted to send this picture of all of them with her. Now I want to mention that what's in this device, the one shown there and also the one I'm wearing here, is what's called narrow AI. This is not a super intelligence. I don't think FDA is going to clear anything that I've seen that fits the super intelligence definition. Way too many running amok risks and craziness. But this is an agent. It is using machine learning to interpret multiple channels of data continuously. It's making decisions based on that data, based on things it's been trained from. And then it is taking actions to call people and follow instructions that you have given it when you are conscious and alert, or your caregiver is. And this is a very helpful kind of AI out there today that many people say is helping save lives, helping people get there in time to save lives. Now, what about more general AI? And here I am showing you a picture of my colleague Hiroshi Ishiguro and a twin android he made quite a while ago. You see these robots that look like people being made today too, but this has been going on quite a while. There's amazing artists out there making robots that look like us. In fact, he made one that looks like his wife and one that looks like his daughter. Originally he said, I want to be able to send the robot to go give talks. You know, he lives in Japan and it's a big journey to travel. And then he could just jack into it and teleport and give his talk. I'm like, well, you still can't do 2 talks at once, you know. So these robots increasingly look and act like us. And now, of course, they're being hooked up to the large language models, LLMs, chatbots, so that you can have a more fluid conversation with them. Now, let me go back a little further when they didn't look like us, but Rod Brooks, who headed the robots work and world-famous roboticist at MIT and co-founder of iRobot, and I were on stage talking about like what it means to be human or machine. And Rod said, I am a robot. Now, this is Cog, one of the robots he was building at the time, which was one of the most advanced and ambitious humanoid robots at the time. Now, it's not emphasizing trying to look like Rod. By the way, Rod was also Cynthia's thesis advisor on Kismet that I just showed you. As we pressed Rod for why he said, I am a robot, he said because he believes in materialism. He believes that we are only material stuff. We are a robot made of just different kind of stuff, like a biological robot. Now, materialism is a philosophical belief that nothing exists but matter and its movements and modifications. And it's important to know that while many scientists and non-scientists adopt this philosophical belief, itself, it is not a belief rooted in science. This is a philosophical position. There's no scientific evidence that you have to believe in materialism. There's a method we often use in science of working with methods that are just working with materials. But the belief that that's all that exists is not supported by science. There's another philosophical position that I want to point out too that some of you may have, and that is called scientism. It's become quite popular over the last decade among mostly non-scientists who think that science is the only way to gain knowledge that is meaningful or reliable. Now let's think about this sentence for a moment. If you're uncertain about, I think this is a self-refuting sentence. And if you're uncertain about this, one reason is that it is claiming, without using science, that science is the only way to gain knowledge that is meaningful or reliable, right? Meanwhile, it's essentially saying that history is not a way to gain knowledge that is meaningful or reliable. Neither are the arts or the humanities or your one-off experiences, personal experiences of yourself and other trusted people. So this is a philosophical belief, not a scientific belief, and it's actually a self-refuting belief. So think about that. I'm going to kind of cross out this one, and then, because it's self-refuting, I don't like being self-refuting. But let's hold on to the materialism for a moment and look a little bit deeper at that. Now, materialists say these things aren't real. Purpose. So Rod said, for example, I'm a materialist, but I don't live my life as a materialist. Because as a materialist, there's no real purpose or meaning. But I live as if there's purpose and meaning. So you have to separate reality, your belief, you have to live with something that you think isn't real. And I was pondering an app, of course, because this is 2025. What would be an app? What would be the materialist app? It would help you every day to live your life without any real purpose and without any meaning and without any authentic experiences. Because conscious experience is not real, and meaning is not real, and purpose is not real. Now, there's another thing to think about with materialism, and that is that it's really nearsighted, it's really myopic. If you look through history, materialists once said everything on this list was just a delusion, right? Germ theory, they're too small, you can't see them, they're immaterial, they don't exist. The universe having an origin, that couldn't possibly be true. Quantum entanglement, way too woo-woo, mysterious, no way that could be. Black holes, and here's a picture of a black hole now, right? So there's a time for imagination, which is a part of science too. Not just experience, which is immaterial, but imagination, which is immaterial, and our ability to use that to do even more powerful discovery and invention and creation of things that hopefully are moral and good. So these are powerful things that a materialist is saying are not real. All right, let's say something positive about some philosophy. There's ontology, which I'm really just a newbie to, but I find this very interesting. Most of our life as scientists is doing things, focus on do. This is focused on being, the philosophy that studies the nature of being. I'm reminded of this famous t-shirt summarizing some of the greatest philosophy. That's Socrates saying, to do is to be. And Plato saying, to be is to do. And the musician Frank Sinatra saying, doobie-doobie-doo. All right, so there's being and there's doing. And in the ontology, in this study of being, there's a very important distinction that was made by Oliver O'Donovan. He says that we are ontologically equivalent to those whom we beget, but we are ontologically superior to what we make. Now let's think about this. If we talk about doing, if we talk about functions, we know that when we beget a child, they can't do that much, right? Parents are sort of excited when the child can smile and start to walk and things like that. They don't do a lot. Then as they become teenagers, they do everything better than their parents, right? And so when it comes to function, we know that everybody in the room is unique. Each of you has special functions and abilities to do things that are probably better than everybody else in the room, right? Everybody has things they can do that are unique and special and awesome. But this is about being, and machines wouldn't be if it weren't for us. So that's where the superiority comes in. It's not in their doing. They may do things better than us. We certainly make them add numbers better than us, and now they can retrieve anything on the internet better than us, and many other amazing things. But when it comes to ontology, there is a ranking. I want to emphasize we are more than what we do. And in building AI to help humans flourish, we need a standard of worth that is higher than our doing, than our abilities, than our functions. And I'd like to propose some criteria for that standard. First, I think it should acknowledge the equal worth of all living persons, every race, sex, nationality, ... It should be independent of our functions or abilities. For example, not dependent on whether or not you have legs, or being young, or any other function or ability that is modified over life. I don't think it should be limited by scientism, materialism, naturalism, these different philosophical viewpoints, some of which are very myopic or self-refuting. I don't think it should be something that can be instated or removed by any person or government with power over us. And I'll just throw in that it should be bigger than some professor's idea. All right, what meets all of these? Now, before I tell you what I think meets all of these, I'm going to take a very short journey through another recent story. I recently have been interacting with both Francis Collins and Richard Dawkins. And like Anderson, who this lecture is named after, some of you may know Francis Collins is a geneticist. He led the Human Genome Project, head of NIH. He's also a Christian and has written some wonderful books about his faith journey and science. And Richard Dawkins, who entered a dialogue with him a couple of times that you can watch online. And in a 2006 interview in particular, there was a very interesting exchange. Now, Richard Dawkins is trained as a zoologist and is a very famous atheist. He's written a number of books promoting atheism. Time.com was, and so Francis and Richard were talking about how to keep discussion going among people with different viewpoints, despite conflicting viewpoints. And somehow Time.com threw out the question, could the answer be God? And what they were talking about. And Dawkins said, there could be something incredibly grand and incomprehensible and beyond our present understanding. Which was the first time I'd hear him acknowledge something like that. Collins immediately responded, that's God. That's not what Dawkins wanted to hear. Now, I imagine there are people here tonight with all kinds of viewpoints. I used to be an atheist who went on quite a journey before I started to believe in God. And some of the things that tripped me up, and I see trip up people like me, is these false images of what God is. You know, it's somebody that if you pray to and they answer your prayers like a cosmic bellhop, then you believe in them, right? And if they don't, you don't believe in them. Well, that's, you know, not the God that today I believe in. It's much grander. I'd say God is not anything an AI can generate or simulate. You're not going to get any images. These images don't represent the true God that's worthy of our belief. When Dawkins described what Collins called God as there could be something incredibly grand and incomprehensible and beyond our present understanding, I really like that description. So I'm going to use that. And unfortunately, it makes a terrible acronym, Siggy Bapu, and it really is a mouthful. Okay. So back to these criteria, right? For criteria about worth that transcends function and ability and doing. I think the answer that satisfies all these criteria is one called Imago Dei, or if you prefer, image of Siggy Bapu. Now, I want to quote the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, what he wrote, and this is from 1965, so reference to men as men and women. The whole concept of the Imago Dei, the image of God, is the idea that all men have something within them that God injected. Not that they have substantial unity with God, but that every man has a capacity to have fellowship with God. And this gives him a uniqueness. It gives him worth. It gives him dignity. And we must never forget this as a nation. There are no gradations in the image of God. Every man, from a treble white to a bass black, is significant on God's keyboard precisely because every man is made in the image of God. Now let's look at what imago means. People think like, oh, a selfie, you know, it looks like it. No, it doesn't. There's no physical resemblance required. I do think it means there are some similar features. So when the famous Oxford professor and author J.R.R. Tolkien, you know, the Lord of the Rings books and many other wonderful works, wrote, he made his character Bilbo Baggins also an author, right? That's Bilbo Baggins somewhat in Imago Tolkien. Okay, they don't look the same, but there's a feature that is similar. One more mathematical picture, if you can stand it, this is a simple one, is a 3D projection down to a 2D projection. So we have a box here in 3D, X, Y, Z. We take a picture of it, we project it down to 2D, 2 dimensions, we have an image. Now, when you do that, you lose something, right? You lose some of the depth unless you take lots of images, okay? And God, of course, being much more than 3D, much, some infinite dimensional beyond time and space, and something incredibly grand beyond our comprehension. Of course, when you project God down, you're gonna lose a lot. So we're omitting a lot by being just an image of God. The qualities of Imago Dei include things like humility, not arrogance, mercy, love, grace, and forgiveness, and equality, not exploitation. Importantly, Imago Dei is not, as some contrive, an excuse to assert oneself as better than other beings. That's a position often associated with abuse of the environment or of animals. And such behavior would show more ignorance of Imago Dei than reflection of it. It includes inestimable worth. But this is not any excuse to act sanctimonious or to flaunt an intellectus Dei. That kind of behavior would illuminate freedom to act in ways that depart from Imago Dei. C.S. Lewis, I love what he said, "There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal." Imago Dei is given to everyone, not exclusive to religious people or any group. There's even abundant evidence of people treating one another with Imago Dei among people who don't even believe in God. It's really interesting when you dig and look for this, you'll find this. It can also prevent dangerous dehumanization. And on that, I want to emphasize the language of machine. I think human as machine is somewhat dangerous language. We have a history of enslavement, where denying people personhood and treating them as working machines, is disastrous. We've seen women called baby-making machines. We've seen soldiers called killing machines. We see people being reduced to their parts as just good for organ donation. We see youth and many people today having existential crises if they fail at something, if they're not good at something, if they're not productive at something, they think they have no worth because of something they can't do. We've seen historically unjust killings because of age, injury, disability, giant list there. So these are all things that are dangerous when we reduce people to machines. So while we might use it to model, like a machine-like metaphor to model fluid flow or some interesting functions we do, I think we need to be very careful, especially as AI gains power, that we recognize that we are not simply machines. Now, we differ from our AI in important ways, even though it performs functions that sometimes exceed our own. We are its makers. We are alive. We have authentic consciousness, which I think is a real thing. We have real self-awareness, real experiences and feelings. We are also moral agents capable of freely choosing to do good or evil. Machines right now don't have free choice and they have no awareness. They're not capable of being moral agents. And we have inestimable worth thanks to the Imago Dei, which invites fellowship with that something incredibly grand and incomprehensible beyond our present understanding. So back to our tree, and I'll close with this and invite you to imagine for a moment that you're not here. Imagine maybe you're sitting under the most magnificent tree somewhere in nature, or somewhere beautiful, somewhere you just love to go and be. You can close your eyes if you like, and see in your imagination the beauty around you. And I encourage you to take a breath and breathe in that imagined beauty and exhale the stress or whatever might be holding you back from that. And take a moment and pay attention to the experience of feeling that you are able to have. You are doing something that no machine can do. You're also being uniquely you, which nobody else can be. And I invite you to contemplate the possibility of something incredibly grand and incomprehensible and beyond our present understanding. And I think that something offers all of us an unbelievable but true and real experience of peace, joy, knowledge, wisdom, and so much more. I encourage you to open your eyes. And I encourage you to remember as you go forth that you are not just a machine. You are not a machine. You are made in the image of God. And you are invited to commune with that incredibly grand one that is beyond our comprehension. I think we're going to move to some Q&A now. I invite you to also give feedback. I put some links here for more evidence. And I wish to thank a bunch of people who've contributed to the work I've presented here today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ros, for this very profound talk and conversation about what it is that makes us as humans distinct. Before we start doing Q&A, I am going to ask a couple of questions. So we have a little bit of opportunity to hear from her, where I kind of like ask a couple of questions, and then we'll switch over to Q&A in the room. So start thinking about your questions. And once you get your questions, and whenever we are kind of like finishing up, we'll switch over to the room. So I'll sit down here as well. So Ros, you alluded a little bit to the fact that you grew up as an atheist and then came to the Christian faith. And maybe later we can go into kind of like that story a little bit more in detail. But I want to kind of explore a little bit with you the next chapter in that phase. So you come to know Jesus, and then what happens, and how did it happen that you start realizing that the Christian faith has something to say about your work and has something to say about AI and computer science?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if people want the story of the journey, that upper right QR code can give you links to lots of things, including that story. I'd say today it's actually more relevant than ever to a lot of what's happening in AI on a lot of levels. One of them is you may hear a lot about trying to make AI more fair and unbiased. People are recognizing that the data that it's trained on exhibits lots of behavior that we don't really want to promote going forward. And it's really interesting to ask people, where do you get that sense of all people should be treated equally, right? Why shouldn't there be bias? There are a lot of cultures in the world that think there should be bias. There's some, where I'm certainly not treated the same. So why do we here in America think that? And the earliest source I know of that is in Genesis, and it's the Imago Dei, which is, again, as Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said so well, is the source of that equality for all people, no matter your race, your gender, your abilities, no matter what.
So you find that in the Christian, Jewish kind of story, so to say, like that the really earliest idea of the Imago Dei is kind of foundational for thinking about like human dignity, about the difference between humans and machines, but also the difference between humans and God, so to say. So it's kind of like, and it encompasses like ethics, and it encompasses like the way that we look at reality and look at the world.
Yeah, you think about how radical it was at the time, too. It was tremendously revolutionary for the people who started putting that into practice. Now, we're all imperfect people, so it's not perfectly put into practice, but it's an amazing statement.
Yeah. So I have another an idea coming from the scriptures as well, and I want to run it by you, see what you think about that.
Okay.
So one central theological idea in Christianity is the idea of the incarnation. that Christ took on a human form, including a body, and really kind of emphasizing the fact that we are embodied people. So the material side of us, but not only the material side, right, the spiritual side as well. And how does this idea of embodiment shape your thinking about what it means to be human? And as a result, the possible personhood of machines.
Yeah, for being human, the first thing that just comes to mind is our finite limitations, right? Like God made us with these finite limitations. We need to sleep, we need to eat, we need to rest, and that is considered good. So we should understand it and learn how to work with that. Another thing that's interesting about the incarnation is Jesus came as a specific person, right? Like a unique, specific person, which I think also says that each of us is like this is to be celebrated, that no two people are the same. Even if you're genetically identical, you're two different people. So every person is unique and, not just embodied with, a unique body, but a unique soul, a unique person. That said, while machines are more likely to be mass-produced because business practices are going to require these economies of scale to survive. So at some level, maybe there's little microstructures that are different, but they're all going to be, pretty much the same. You might put a different color wig on one if it's designed to look like a person, but they're not people. We don't know how to make people. Well, actually, we do know how to make people. There's a much better way to make people than making machines, right? Procreation is awesome. Why would anybody want to make a machine this way, make a person this way when, there's the God-given way? So we do know how to make people. When we make machines, we are making something different. And sometimes we want to make them easier for people to interact with, and people have a hard time working with all the panels and the programming and all that. So that's really what drove a lot of the, can it use English? Can it nod when I nod? Can I, I don't know how to use a computer, but I know how to talk to a person. So can you just make it so I can interact with it like I know how to interact? So a lot of that is what has driven the human-like interfaces. But to call it a person is really not accurate.
Thank you.
On that note, though, when we make them look like people, we invite a lot of trouble. And some of you may know the Sophia robot of David Hansen. He makes these, he's an amazing artist, makes robots that look like people. And Sophia was accorded citizenship in Saudi Arabia. So you can imagine many women in Saudi Arabia were very unhappy with this because they are not treated with the same rights as men in that country. And yet suddenly Sophia the robot was given citizenship and the ability to drive and other things that they weren't given.
So to a certain extent, you can almost say that then there is dehumanizing tendencies in putting personhood or assigning personhood to machines.
Yeah, it's lowering. Us. And really, that was just a marketing stunt, but still, it made a lot of people angry.
Yeah. So in the biblical creation story, which is shared by all Semitic religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, it is God who says, let us make humans in our own image. And this is where the idea of the Imago Dei comes from. Are we at a point now where humans are trying to say, and you kind of alluded to it, that it doesn't work, but some people are saying, let us make machines in our own image, right?
Yeah, we've said imago humana.
Yeah, and what does that mean when we kind of move that direction, and are there limits to how similar we can make machines to who we are as human beings? And what is kind of the ontological gap that you described there that separates us from machines?
Yeah, I think thinking about the ontology is really helpful there because we can make them look like us, we can make them do things we can do, but they are made by us, right? It's still okay to put Sophia in a box and ship her in the cargo section, even though she's been given citizenship and people call it she, right? Robots can declare their pronouns too, I guess, or their makers declare their pronouns. So there's nothing unethical in turning off Sophia, right, and putting Sophia back in the box. And by the way, when Sophia gets paid for making an appearance, it doesn't go in Sophia's bank account. It goes in her maker's bank account, right? So I think when we start talking practically about the reality of a robot having a maker, and the maker having to keep it working, and the maker needing money to keep it working, and all the practical things that go along with that, it's very clear that there will be human makers of these. Now, some people say, oh, the human makers will go away eventually, and the robots will make the robots. Well, we'll see. I mean, we still can't even reliably get any of the technology to operate the AV in our labs, so I'll believe it when, when we can get a few things, usually code that modifies itself quickly becomes non-functioning.
Yeah. So you talk already about some of the flaws there of kind of like our own technology. That's not even like any artificial thing underneath there. So in recent discussions about the AI, there has been much debate about whether and how AI itself could act morally or act in line with a moral framework. And it seems that much depends on AI's human designers defining what moral action actually is for machines. And how do you see Christianity and other religions and philosophies contributing to debates over the morality of AI? And is there an important role for religion and the humanities and other disciplines to play in this conversation?
Yeah, it's a huge important role. And I'll encourage people here, even if you're not in science, engineering, technology, I think everybody has a role to play in this. Speaking publicly about the importance of truth, speaking publicly about values and how much they matter. I'm seeing a real erosion happening in them as increased cheating is tolerated, increased deception, increased fake information, increased lying, outright lying, false papers being submitted, false reviews being done on papers. It's just rampant and it's horrifying. And I think we need like a reformation of values where people talk about like what are virtues, what do we care about as a society, and making sure that we speak that to the makers of all of this so that they don't just do what's quick and makes more revenue for the company, because these companies have received so many tens of billions of investment that they are really desperate to return on that investment, and they are cutting a lot of corners that are not the kind that ethical businesses would usually allow in the past.
So speaking up about those kind of topics is very important, and we need everyone to kind of speak up and kind of like let their voice be known about
say what's important.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, perfect.
The truth is being rewritten in some countries. You may know the AI they've deployed already answers questions the way the government wants it answered and not based on historical fact. So it's very important that people who care about truth speak up.
Yeah. Well, I want to open it up to audience participation. The first, do we have like mics? Yeah. The first question goes to a student. And so if you're a student, raise your hands. And I see Tate right here. Tate gets the first question.
Thank you so much for your inspiring talk, and thank you especially for bringing your own humanity to it. It's wonderful to hear your energy and love, so thank you. I have to say, I was really intrigued by your emotion-identifying robots and AIs that you were describing earlier in your talk. And I have to say, I'm particularly bad at even describing my own emotions and recognizing how I'm feeling. My best friends are a little better at it, and then I pay a professional human who's trained to do that to tell me how I feel. Could these AIs eventually take over that role? And could further developing them be the key to understanding our own feelings, emotions, experiences?
It's an interesting question. So right now they don't recognize our feelings. However, they can recognize changes in our face and voice and all, which I don't know if you've ever seen somebody who looks really angry and they're yelling and you say, I'm sorry I made you angry, and they're like, I'm not angry, right? They're like the last one to be aware of it. So it can help us see what others see. We also have a new project Jocelyn Shire in my lab is doing with a physiological feedback wearable to help people who are alexithymic. These are people who often are not aware. You're in a big group, like 10% of people have a hard time feeling their emotions. We're giving them a kind of biofeedback on this, which we think, we hypothesize could help people get better at detecting some of these changes in themselves. So we want to first use the technology to help people get better at it. I think it's a little spooky sometimes when a machine sees something about you and you don't. So we're trying to use the technology in service of helping humans develop these skills first. But it's a hard problem because a lot of people don't really know what they're feeling. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for your thoughts tonight. My question is about the ethical risks of artificial intelligence. So I study and I analyze fake news, misinformation, and that's something important that you say. So artificial intelligence and machines do not feel, but the people who consume the information are AI users, they do feel and they do act in some way. So what do you think that are the most important challenge in ethical use of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I'm realizing the water here is a little hard for me to hear over. Are you asking, so you're talking about the deep fakes, the lies, and all on social media, and like, do I think that's the biggest ethical challenge? I think today, that's the one that certainly reaches the most people. And I don't know why so many people believe what they read online, but if anything, maybe it will get so bad that people just go offline, right? But we do still get a lot of useful stuff online. So maybe what it's gonna do is make it all the more important that we go back to authoritative sources, trustworthy. I was talking to a journalist the other day, a journalism student, who was really bemoaning the fact that she thought like nobody would ever employ her, like they don't use journalists anymore. And because it's so easy for AI to just summarize the news. But we do need human journalists who can recognize good sources versus bad and can separate the garbage from the truth and really dig and learn what's true. And we also need small town communities that help make them feel valued so that there are stepping stones for people to climb those ladders. And New York Times top journalist was saying, the 5 little jobs he had on the way to the top where he learned so much. And you won't get the great people at this if we don't also create opportunities for people to keep learning these skills. So we have to be very careful when we replace, when we put all that false information out there and then also let that false information feed, more news summarization and so forth, and pretend that that could replace people when, it still takes people to exercise judgment to say what's false.
Hi. So speaking as someone whose formal education is in theater and philosophy and who is now currently working in data analytics and building AI, thank you so much for your talk. And what I've been seeing in my work, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if there's just data that I haven't seen yet. In AI, I've seen that there's a kind of logarithmic arc towards simulating being human. And my question to you is, I know that that line will never cross or even come up to the line of what it actually is to be human, but how close do you forecast that getting? And how soon do you think the machines could actually simulate? And beyond our ability to understand or to comprehend this as something other than human.
You want to talk about the singularity? I don't think they're going to become human. I do see already that we can have conversations with them as if they're human, because in fact they're taking human conversations that have already happened online and they're representing them to us. They're matching up our words with the other halves of conversations that have taken place with minor modifications. And so they're simulating that, fabulously in many cases. They are still very terrible with simulations with embodied stuff. Really creepy. But if people want to invest a lot in that, that will make progress. Usually how fast it progresses is a function of how much money people put into it. And right now, more of the money is going into the LLMs, the large language models. But there's starting to be more in embodied agents to do some physical robot type jobs. I hope they won't try to pass them off as people. I think that would be something our society should have a bigger conversation about. I would currently be on the side of let's not have them pretend to be something they aren't.
Hi, Dr. Picard. Thank you for the wonderful talk. I was just wondering about the discourse with colleagues of yours in this span. Have you been able to share your faith with colleagues of yours? You mentioned you had a surgeon friend look at the brain and come to faith. What's that been like within the affective computing group?
I mentioned my surgeon friend. The question is, repeat just the question part.
It's hard to hear here.
Yeah, there's wonderful water and wonderful questions.
Yeah, just very simply, how has it been sharing your faith within
affective? Sharing faith with these people. Yeah, well, it's a bit scary sometimes because I used to be the atheist that thought people who were Christians had probably thrown their brains out the window, so I imagine they're thinking that of me, it's a pretty rotten starting point. But Christian faith is not just based on faith, it's based on a ton of evidence. There's a lot of great rational evidence for it. I mean, much more than we could cover in a week of sessions here. I mean, just amazing evidence. And when you start to learn that and you see, and many of my scientific colleagues, and actually the Anderson person this lecture is named after, also talked about this too, there's no discrepancy with science. There have been some manufactured discrepancies over history, but there's no discrepancy between Christian faith and science. And in fact, one could argue that people who try to be a scientist without belief in that something incredibly grand and incomprehensible beyond our present understanding, if you try to believe that it's all just meaningless and random and undirected forces, and who knows where those forces came from or originated, we'll skip over that part because nobody knows. But if you try to believe it's all just random, meaningless, purposeless, then how can you even do science? Science doesn't make any sense, right? Science is assuming that there's order and meaning. You can't even have a conversation unless you're gonna allow that there's some meaning, right? Like we're all just totally deceived, really. And then you're deceived all the way back to, the origin of things that you can't even have a first cause of. So actually, science without religion, science without Christianity, science without God, I think is actually harder to defend than science with Christianity. So as I talk to people who are willing to, open their mind and explore these, philosophical and scientific and deeper questions, and not just get caught up with cosmic bellhop concepts of God or little green men concepts of God, if you really go to the God beyond all space and time and our very ability to know, that's liberating.
So, yeah, thank you for this talk. One way in which humans are often thought to image God, according to a lot of accounts, is in our creativity. And I've been hearing enthusiasts, especially about generative AI, go on and on and on about how creative generative AI is and how it can be even more creative than people, and just do all these amazing things that humans could never do. And creativity is amazing. And I've noticed how many pictures you had in your presentation that were generated by AI and stuff like that. So my question is, given what you know about humans and about AI, is AI creative?
It's certainly not creative like people are. It's rearranging things from people. If people hadn't created all the amazing stuff that it's trained on, we wouldn't be impressed by what it's doing. We have worked for years trying to get generative AI to make anything that looked interesting, and a lot of human effort goes into that. I should emphasize that when we say an AI does something amazing, like, wow, look at this cool thing this generative AI did, what we should really be saying is, look at this cool thing that people did by building the AI and using it, okay? Like when the Nobel Prize went to for AlphaFold, this AI predicting protein shapes and structures, it didn't go to the AI. It went to the people who created it, which is correct, okay? So when AI does something amazing, don't forget there are people behind that AI. The makers, we people are the makers of AI, and when it does something great, we should celebrate what people are doing with it and hope that people are shaping it to do great things, right? We need the moral shaping because it's powerful. It could be used to do horrible things too, right? But when we shape it to do good things, let's celebrate the people making it and the good things they're doing with it. Let's also speak out against when we could all be doing better with it too. Feel free to give me feedback too. I'm learning, yeah.
Roz, a bit of a follow-up question to the one that was asked earlier. Your colleague who said, I'm studying the brain and it seems to point to God. I'm amazed that everybody in any field of medicine at some point simply doesn't fall down on their knees and worship, and frankly, all of science. And you mentioned Richard Dawkins, who has recently come out and said, well, maybe I'm a cultural Christian, because he recognizes that his materialism and naturalism provides no moral foundation. As you go down the world of AI and we make all these advances, the distinctiveness of humanity becomes even more evident, if you will. I'm curious if you're seeing in your colleagues across various disciplines waking up to the reality that this materialism doesn't answer anything. And so it isn't so much a question of you personally sharing your faith journey. Are you seeing them wakening up to this? Because if anybody should see it, it's the world of science should see our Creator.
I share that experience the more I look at, and learn about our biology, which is just even more complex and amazing, the more in awe I am. It just, the complexity, the information, theoretic content, I mean, it's mind-blowing. I don't have like a good empirical sample of if a whole lot of people are shifting away from their materialism, but I am seeing a lot more people starting to talk about their shifts away from it. And so I think people are feeling more comfortable talking about it. There is more, which I think is good. We should all be having more civil conversations about things that people don't necessarily all think the same on, right? We want to have these conversations. There is news that the newest group of students in the universities are much more interested in spiritual questions than their predecessors. And so the campus Christian workers I've been hearing from are saying that there's real growth there among young people these days. We certainly see more athletes talking about it. We see then a number of people in technology. The other day, the founder of Wikipedia did a big thing about his journey from atheism to Christianity. It took, again, a very long journey, but very big influential people are starting to come out, from staunch atheist positions with lots of atheist friends and colleagues saying, wait a minute. Even Dawkins was upset when his atheist protege, I'm blanking on her name, Ali. Ali. She, a Muslim woman, went from being an atheist to announcing she's a Christian. And he's there talking with her like, you can't become a Christian, And she was explaining a very rational, intelligent, reason.
Thank you for your talk tonight. You had mentioned governments that have their own AI based on a different set of data. You also mentioned a desire by at least some people to remove bias, but there's also a counter desire by some people to add bias. We see deep fake now in movies and in media. What's to prevent this authoritative source that you talked about from having its own AI database, like its own set that it's learning? For example, Answers in Genesis is an organization that has an AI like ChatGPT that answers with answers from its database of its preferred theological approach rather than evidence-based science. How do we trust anything?
Great question. And you're quite right. I mean, anybody can make these and put in the biases that they want, and there's nothing to stop people right now. And it doesn't look like we're going to be putting any regulations out there on that. So all the more, and an AI can't tell what's true or not, and an AI doesn't have judgment. It can support our judgment, but it doesn't have judgment. So it's going to go back to people. We need people. We need people who are moral beings who understand, or maybe we don't perfectly understand what's true all the time, right? But we believe there's truth. We seek truth. We have better methods for finding it. And we can come around these and apply some of the same principles we apply to other sources and say that this one was shaped and tested and subjected to this kind of scrutiny, and here's its source data, and here's the tests it's been through. And then try to build some trust or credibility around that. But the trust and credibility will go back to the people shaping it.
Rosalind, thank you again. It's been 2 days of great discussion with you. You're going Imago Dei, and I'm thinking Deus ex machina.
Deus ex machina. Hold the microphone close so everybody can hear you.
No, I'm just saying that the difference between the two, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that, but I wanted to ask you something about another singularity, and so many people are going on the issue between faith and science, and you talk about the inspiration that comes from science and the unknown and a venture toward truth. Do you think we approach spirituality and faith, even if I don't want to say that we're atheistic, but not necessarily actively religious, but as we move toward greater understanding of foundational principles, that's a form of faith and religion and integrates with us, and that we're in that same process? I think you know I'm a molecular biologist. Spent a lot of time with Francis Collins arguing with him as well. But I felt a certain spiritual understanding to his enthusiasm and trying to grasp the universe. And, kind of questions we'd ask, and I'll stop with this, but on a regular basis, myself and my colleagues, we digitalize genetic information and other components of life. I put that on a system. I can transmit that anywhere in the world. I can transmit it out anywhere in the universe. When that signal is picked up, that life message can be reconverted, put into a biosystem, and create something living. I can create genes that can lead to an embryo, or any of my colleagues can. How do you see that as contradictory to some of the things when we talk about non-mechanistic things and how we're moving more fundamentally, and that digitalization represents a way of kind of integrating rather than pulling things apart in terms of looking at the commonality and origins of these things?
There are a lot of interesting points there. Francis Collins called it the language of God, right? The DNA. And, again, back in awe of the complexity that doesn't appear like something that could just arise from random, undirected mechanisms that themselves would need an origin to explain also. I find, no incompatibility there. I find, again, the more we learn about these biological systems, and we do try to model them as machines, they look like they're designed. They look like designed machines. You look inside the cell, you look at all this stuff, it just bears the mark of intelligence all over it. So it's, even atheists say they look designed, right? So I do think they point, it's very consistent and points one to God. Usually if a person doesn't want to be pointed to God, that's a different issue. It's not based on the reason there. There's plenty of evidence. It's usually based on some other thing that they want to stay away from.
I just want to say that the Jewish author and scholar Hermann Wouk said that quantum physics was the language that God spoke.
Quantum physics is the language God spoke. And music, and lots of other beautiful things, yeah.
So you talked earlier about emotion being part of the internal economy of decision making for people. Emotion is related to how we make decisions. And I was wondering, when you were talking about the work your lab does, it's a lot of getting machines, AI, to recognize and label human emotion. Is there effort to simulate that type of decision making, the emotion in an AI context, to help an AI make decisions in a way that kind of simulates the way that we do it? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah, there's been very little use of models of emotion within machines to adapt their learning and decision making. I think it is an important future direction that we're going to see more of. It needs to be done very cautiously, but based on what we know from people, it's something we do often say to switch strategies. Let's say that you're driving into work a particular way, you have a particular strategy for getting to work. There's a lot of delays, you get frustrated, and what does that feeling of frustration cause you to do? It causes you to pause and say, maybe I should look for a different strategy, right? So an emotion kind of interrupts your status quo and says, let me think about maybe I should find another way. Emotions often work alongside the other things we're doing to kind of regulate and adapt what we're doing. And machines right now don't have any mechanisms like that, although people are starting to build, they recognize this is intelligent. It can be done intelligently, can also be done irrationally, but it can be done intelligently to help a machine do a better job of optimization, machine learning, and a number of other functions. So there's been a little bit of work on it, but not a lot. I think in part because when you try to call it emotion and you try to publish it, the communities that do that work in the beginning are like, ooh, don't call it emotion. So we had to scrub all the words related to that and change it to other names for the stuff, and then it gets published.
Okay, we're getting to the end right here. We got probably room for 2 more questions. So Phil has someone over there. And Casey, did you have someone? No? Oh, right here? Okay.
Yeah, I had a quick question. Today we're filled with dopamine and we need to be rewarded right away. So with videos and content being produced right away, especially with AI now, how do you think that affects our moral development and faith? And I think when we develop, we need to go into that rabbit hole to find the process of developing that moral or that strength in faith. And I was wondering what you thought of that.
Thanks for bringing that up. I'm so glad to see a smart young person here concerned about moral development and faith, and this is great. There have been some studies showing that people using AI instead of learning to do things themselves are becoming worse at thinking, and their judgment is getting worse. And this is really worrisome, right? I mean, I guess, we know when people started using calculators, they weren't quite as good at arithmetic, or when we started using, map devices on our phones, we become less good at thinking through the, the map of the city in our head. But do we want to become less good at moral development and reasoning and thinking and writing and all these other things? And AI is now posing these questions, which are really important to be asked. I'm afraid I don't have the answer. I'm just thrilled you're asking it. But I think it's a very important thing to flag. And we need to not hand this stuff off to AIs. We need to really reaffirm how important it is for human beings.
Simple question. Autism spectrum.
Yes.
You had the picture of the little boy with the glasses. Is that something for sale? Is that something that was being tested? Gathering data?
I'd have to look what's currently for sale. That's an older example. And one of the things that's a problem with technology is things change every day. And my talk slides don't change every day. So I try to keep them up to date, but sometimes some of them, you know, things change overnight. So that was for sale. That particular set of glasses, that was a version of Google Glass. There are other people making smart glasses now also that this kind of software can be embedded in. Google Glass took Glass off the market, but they left enough out there that people could keep using them for certain you know, uses like in the autism case. So that you know, has been offered. And there's lots of open source and free software out there now to do the facial affect analysis. Again, it doesn't tell you what people are necessarily feeling, but it picks up like that you're nodding. If we're talking and you're nodding and you're smiling, I might keep talking until you stop nodding and smiling, and then I get the red light. Yeah. So we've had a lot of people on the autism spectrum you know, very happy with that.
All right, thank you, Ros, for a super engaging lecture, and then a very, very engaging Q&A time as well. Thank you for your wisdom, for your winsomeness, for sharing your heart with us, also about like the development of AI and how much we need human beings with wisdom and discernment. And people are willing and the courage to speak up and say, like, this is what we want and this is what we not want. And with AI and all the developments that are, where things are changing almost every day, right, as you say, it is so easy to leave that in the hands of the developers, to leave that in the hands of like a couple of people who have like the bigger companies who own the AI models, and it's pretty easy to see how quickly it goes off the rails that way as well. And for you to speak into this as an expert, and for you to kind of pull us in and say, like, you guys are not the experts, but you see this happening. We need to speak into this. We need to have the wisdom and the discernment and think about like the ethical implications. Thank you for making us aware of that, waking us up to kind of like this kind of like calling that we have in this society, which is changing every day again. Thank you for sharing that wisdom with us. Thank you for being here. And thank you for just doing amazing work in the field of epilepsy and autism and all the other things that you're doing at MIT. There's a lot more to talk about. There's after, basically like in a minute, there's going to be a little reception in the back right there. There's all kind of like snacks out on the table. We invite you to stay around, to hang around, to find some people that you want to continue this conversation with. This is a conversation that is not over. After this event is over, this is a conversation that we need to continue and continue and continue. And so maybe the first part of that continuation could be tonight here when you hang around a little bit. On your chairs, you can find a little note card with kind of a couple of questions. There's our little evaluation cards. We would love to get your feedback on this event. We put on those lectures a couple of times a year, and we would like to know what you actually think about that. And so you could help us quite a bit by filling out this note card and then returning it to one of the 3 baskets that are around. They're kind of like wooden kind of like baskets. Casey is holding up one right over there. I think there's one at this door, there's one at the coffee station, and there's one at that access right there. If you are able to fill out that evaluation to us, we would very much appreciate that. And then maybe you saw it at the beginning on the slides. We are continuing our kind of lecture series on April 4th with a lecture on Russian writers who think deeply about faith and atheism. So if you've ever read Dostoevsky or Tolstoy or any of the other Russian writers, you know how deeply they struggle with questions about faith and with questions of atheism. And we have Gary Sol Morrison coming up on April 4th to talk with us what he has learned by studying Russian literature about these big kind of existential questions. And we would love for you to join us on April 4th back here in this room again. So if you are interested in those kind of questions, please join us for that lecture. I think that's it from me. Thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging in the discussion. And we'd love to see you back again, and we'd love to see